Bom dia a todos. Obrigada pela vossa participação neste primeiro webinar de 2023. O webinar vai decorrer em inglês. Estamos aqui só a dar umas pequenas palavras de introdução. Eu, sem mais demoras, eu passo a palavra ao Fernando Resina da Silva e a seguir, quando o Fernando me passar a palavra, depois já começa em inglês. Daniel, we'll speak in English in short moments, ok? Fernando.
Muito bem, muito obrigado, Sandra. Bom dia a todos, muito obrigado por estarem novamente connosco nesta nova época da série. Isto é um pouco como o Netflix, Digital Learning, já vão por épocas, já vamos na segunda época enfim, e o que pretendemos de facto com estas sessões, é terceira, já é terceira, é verdade, já é a terceira época, isto passa num instante e a emoção mantém-se, não é? As dúvidas, as incógnitas, como é que isto vai ser o desfecho, que nunca ocorrerá um desfecho verdadeiramente, mantém-se. Enfim, o que nós pretendemos com estas sessões é discutir o que está a acontecer na União Europeia de mais relevante em matéria de regulação, em matéria de evolução tecnológica e discutir com as pessoas que estão por dentro destes assuntos no dia-a-dia e que nos podem trazer o seu conhecimento, a sua experiência nestas matérias. Just a few words in English to our speakers. Thank you, Danielle. Rui, unfortunately, Paul will not be with us today, but thank you for being with us today and sharing your views about AI. It will be very interesting, I'm sure. Bom, de facto, a inteligência artificial é talvez aquela tecnologia que neste momento está mais na berra, digamos assim, é aquela que está a sofrer maiores evoluções, é aquela que está a ser mais utilizada e a realidade é que todos os dias temos notícias que nos demonstram isso mesmo. A semana passada começou a ser noticiado que a Microsoft iria investir na OpenAI, a empresa fundada pelo Elon Musk e pelo Sam Altman, dedicada à inteligência artificial, iria investir 10 mil milhões de dólares para ficar com 49% da empresa. 10 mil milhões de dólares é de facto uma quantia exorbitante. Isto para quê? Para terem acesso ao chat GPT, um chatbot de inteligência artificial, que está desde novembro em teste ao público, aberto ao público de forma gratuita, e é uma máquina fabulosa, que podem testar, ela está acessível, responde a quase tudo quanto lhe perguntarmos. Eu sei de uma agência de publicidade que testou criar slogans publicitários com o ChatGPT e houve uns que foram realmente bons. Portanto, está de facto numa evolução fabulosa. E com esta aquisição, a Microsoft pretende vir a disponibilizar no Outlook, no Microsoft Office e no 365, ou seja, pretende dotar ferramentas como o Word, como o Excel e o PowerPoint a muito curto prazo com a inteligência artificial. O Satya Nadella, na última intervenção em Davos ontem, penso eu que foi mesmo ontem, confirmou que vão começar a disponibilizar a inteligência artificial nas suas ferramentas, começar pelo Bing. Portanto, o Bing o motor de busca vai aqui ter uma visibilidade e novamente uma posição no mercado muito grande. E de facto isto é fascinante porque a inteligência artificial deixou de estar apenas nas empresas, no desenvolvimento dos seus negócios, passa a estar acessível aos cidadãos, passa a estar acessível a todos nós em ferramentas como o Word, o PowerPoint e o Excel, o que é de facto uma coisa fabulosa. Pronto, eu não vou falar sobre as questões regulatórias e legais, que a Iakovina vai falar, mas eu queria enfim só apenas dar esta nota de entrada para demonstrar a relevância e o impacto que a inteligência artificial vai ter a muito curto prazo nas nossas vidas individualmente consideradas e como ferramenta que nós individualmente podemos recorrer. Muito obrigado, Sandra, é um prazer estar aqui com a APDC mais uma vez. Passo-te a palavra.
I've switched to English now so that we can welcome Daniele Quercia. So let me just make you a short presentation of today's program. So we'll start with the presentation of the future of AI regulation in the European Union by Iakovina Kindylidi. She's the International Advisor for Communications, Data Protection and Technology at VDA. And then we'll promote a debate, a conversation with Daniele Quercia, is department head at Nokia Bell Labs and at Cambridge and professor of urban informatics at King's College at London. and with also Rui Lopes, the CEO of Gentify. We were expecting the participation also of Paul Dimas, the Vice President of Product Innovation of Unbabel, but unfortunately he got a cold, he's quite sick, so he can't join us today because he was not feeling well. So as Fernando told you already, we would like to welcome you to the first Digital Union of 2023, this initiative that brings together APDC and VDA, combining the APDC expertise in the digital economy with all the legal complexity mastered by VDA, and to address these European policies issues in the digital economy. So to explain to some people that are joining us for the first time, the term union that we have mastered on Digital Union also refers to the association of companies that, although they are competitors, we are united to be part of a leading digital Europe, which is also one of the APDC goals as an association. So we have chosen the topic of artificial intelligence for this webinar because we have seen the growing attention on this subject. And also Fernando already mentioned that the artificial intelligence has made a remarkable progress, not only at the text level with the ChatGPT that Fernando mentioned, which has surpassed 1 million users in just the first 5 days since it became available. So it's quite remarkable. But also the AI that is generating art through images, from images or videos. So we are discussing this because we are promoting this webinar because we see that Brussels argues that the way the artificial intelligence is approaching will also determine the world we live now and we want to live in the future. So to create a resilient Europe for the digital decade, people in business must be able to safely rely on and also benefit from AI. So the European AI strategy that Iakovina will speak us also aims to make the EU a world-fast center in this field and ensure that AI is human-centric and trusted. So that's why. So without more delays, I would like to invite Iakovina to start her presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Sandra and Fernando. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. As mentioned by Sandra and Fernando, in the next 15 minutes or so, I will try to provide an overview of the key developments on AI regulation in the European Union. Of course, to do that, I need to sort of explain, at least from a legal point of view, what is AI. And in this note, I apologize in advance to the speakers for any technical inconsistencies, but we have also our way as lawyers to approach and understand the technology. And then I will pass a bit to the main legal and ethical challenges. And of course, this presentation will be far from exhaustive. It's impossible to cover every aspect in the next 15 minutes. Instead, my aim is to share with you some general ideas and to set the scene for the very interesting discussion that will take place after my presentation. So for the purpose of the presentation, I have prepared a couple of slides, which we will share with you after the session. Since
Iakovina,
yes, I will start sharing.
No rush, okay? Because you are really speedy.
It's the 15 minutes. It's the 15 minutes.
No rush, because Paul Dimas is also not coming, so please take your time, okay?
Thank you very much. So I hope you're all seeing the slides. So the slides to help the audience to follow better, since the presentation and the session will take place in English today, will be in Portuguese, and we will share them with you after the end of the session. So to start with, as lawyers, we are fond of definitions, and I would like to start with the definition of AI. And the story, let's say, the definition of AI starts by the fact that there is not really a complete definition, and what we have nowadays is very descriptive. So although gradually there is a shift, there are still many definitions used in articles, even in dictionaries. Even the definition of ChatGPT that Fernando mentioned before on AI links artificial intelligence with human intelligence. Inevitably, such approach leads to philosophical disputes regarding what is human intelligence and especially what is consciousness. However, although it's a very interesting philosophical topic, in law, the need for a definition detached from human element is important. And this definition should be also generally accepted. And it's necessary to create clarity, avoid fragmentation, any loopholes related with the definitions. And it should be also future-proofed, especially when we're talking about a technology that is constantly developing and is accelerating. So to restate the main premises and what we are trying to achieve in legal research and also as legal practitioners is to approach the AI definition in a broad and clear way, broad enough and clear enough to entail the different forms of the technology, but also the different forms as the technology progresses. And at the same time, we are trying to be precise and provide the necessary legal certainty, which, for example, right now is lacking. So in its current wording, on the left side of the slide, you can see the definition that is included in the proposal for AI regulation, the AI Act, which we will go through further on in the presentation. So in brief, the definition states that AI means a software developed with one of the techniques included in Annex 1 of the proposal. And this means that aside from these techniques, there will be certain objectives, certain outputs that the AI will achieve based on the predefined human objectives. And then in this Annex 1, there are various techniques that they are outlined, including machine learning, logic and knowledge-based approaches, and statistical approaches. So, of course, and it's important to consider this, the task of creating an efficient definition for the purposes of the law is not an easy task, especially when we're talking about a technology that the regulator necessarily does not understand fully. And while it also develops in a fast pace, so the pacing problem that is often mentioned. But this particular definition has raised a lot of eyebrows since it is too broad. It appears to go a bit beyond what would normally be considered intelligent, since the proposal appears to cover statistical software, which is very doubtful that qualifies as AI, and also even general computer programs. So aside from this too broad scope, it also seems to be very technical and therefore likely to be outdated. So once new techniques are introduced to achieve the same results or to train the algorithms. So on the contrary, what we could use is a definition based on the properties or effects rather than techniques. And what are the main characteristics of AI? Let's say if we want to break it down: data, the use of algorithms that can be also integrated in a hardware, the capacity to autonomously reach certain outputs, perform tasks, and all that, of course, it does not do in abstract, but there is always human intervention involved, and it does so with the objectives defined by its AI developers. These characteristics of the technology, and in particular, because indirectly we are mentioning only machine learning or deep learning techniques of AI, also translate to three inherent problems. First of all, biases. So over the years, there are many infamous cases of AI biases, with some of which I'm sure you are certain familiar. The problem, although it's very well documented, and we have various discussions and papers on it, but at the same time, it's very difficult to solve. Since the data that the AI is fed during its entire life cycle, from the training to the validation verification process and later on when it's being used, are based on biased human data, even faulty decisions made by humans in the past. And this aspect is interesting because in the AI Act, there is this general prohibition of biases and errors. However, in the current wording, there is not much guidance on how companies can achieve that error-free and bias-free objective. Secondly, due to its structure, the deep neural networks that form the AI have millions of connections. All combined form the AI decisions, but it's impossible to trace it back. At the same time, the statistical based truths that make the AI efficient make also very difficult to verify whether it functions properly. And thirdly, and closely related to the previous drawback, detecting and concomitantly correcting those errors will prove to be a difficult task. These last two difficulties, problems of the AI is in reality the breakdown of what is called the black box problem or the opacity problem, which can be restated as thinking of machine learning and deep learning AI, that well, when we see them functioning, we can see the input, we can see their output, so the incoming and outgoing data, but the internal operations of the system are not very well understood. And this black box problem translates to three legal challenges, those unique challenges that we are seeing being repeated and seen either independently, but in reality intertwined in relation to AI. Transparency, so not being able to understand what is being taken into consideration, how it arrived to its decision, explainability of this decision, and auditability, you might also hear it in that term, and of course responsibility, accountability of the AI provider or AI user. In reality, accountability is the other side of the coin of the lack of transparency or the lack of explainability of AI. In addition to these three challenges, so transparency, explainability, accountability, AI is raising additional legal challenges, which I have tried to group here, following a bit the approach of the European Commission in addressing them in its AI strategy, the current literature in the field, and also the problems faced by our clients. So first of all, of course, there are a lot of data challenges. Since data is a sine qua non of AI, there are numerous data challenges starting from the types of data, meaning first of all, personal data that will be used to train and use the AI, the sources of those data, so that whether they are public databases, where they are private sources, the data processing purposes, so whether the processing from the AI, the further processing that is involved to the training of the AI is covered or not, whether information, and this is linked to transparency, is provided to the data subjects, to the individuals as a whole, and the relationships between the parties. But also, aside from the personal data, which is the first thing that comes in mind, since GDPR includes some provisions that are applicable to AI, at the same time, we talk about data challenges related to non-personal data. And this is important when we are referring to confidential information, trade secrets, for example, and also other proprietary information, for instance, intellectual property. So we have also various examples, and the reference to DALI of OpenAI is a good example in this regard, not only about who owns the intellectual property rights related to the output of the AI, but what exactly happens when for example, a copyrightable work or trade secrets is used to train the algorithm. And lastly, and in the light of the upcoming AI Act, compliance issues are also raised. And this refers, of course, to the different obligations that the companies will need to comply with, depending, of course, on the role that they will assume under the AI Act. But we are not only talking about those obligations. We also refer to those that they are already existing or they are upcoming to the horizontal or sector-specific regulatory framework, which may not be explicitly referring to AI, but it does apply to AI systems. In other words, and as you can see from this slide, the fact that we don't have yet a law on AI as such does not mean that we have a regulatory gap. After all, laws and regulations in their majority, and especially in Europe, are technology neutral or technology agnostic. So from these regulations, from these blocks that you see here, as ethical orientation and challenges, certain sector-specific initiatives that may apply depending on the use or the sector that the company operates, strategies and policies, including standards regarding safety and security, and data protection. I would like to focus on the future regulation. And in the next slides, I will briefly discuss the main provisions of the proposal for the regulation on AI, as well as the proposal for the new product liability directive and the proposal for the AI Liability Directive. The last two only came out at the end of last September. So, but let's start from the AI Act. So on April 2021, the European Commission presented the long-awaited proposal for a regulation, the European approach for artificial intelligence, and it proposed a single set of rules to regulate AI. The proposal for an AI regulation was written with a quite broad scope in mind. So it incorporated and established obligations for the most players in the value chain of AI, including providers of AI systems, importers, distributors, authorized representatives, but also professional users of AI, which may also need to comply with the obligations of the providers if certain conditions are met. At the same time, geographically, the proposal is also broad. It follows a bit the logic of GDPR, the so-called Brussels effect. So it applies also to entities that they are not necessarily established in the EU, as long as the AI system is to be placed or put into service in the European Union market, or the output produced by the system will be used in the EU. So you understand this is a quite broad scope. But although it covers various obligations and it's broad enough, it does not cover all AI systems. More specifically, and this is a bit the purpose of the many times seen pyramid, is the risk-based approach followed by the AI Act. So the AI Act only covers the two middle pieces of the pyramid. So high-risk systems and systems that although they are not high risk, they are limited risk due to their proximity with humans, to their interaction with humans, need to comply with certain obligations. So although it is a horizontal law, meaning it is not sector specific, in its scope, it does not regulate AI as a whole. So based on this risk-based approach, we have, starting from the top, systems that are completely prohibited because the risks associated with their use are unacceptable, considering the European framework. Also, we have systems that they are very high risk and they need to comply with the obligations of AI. And we have risks, the AI systems with limited risk that due to this proximity, they need to comply with transparency obligations we will see later on. And of course, we have those low or minimal risk of AI systems that are not subject to the AI Act. However, they are not unregulated. In line with what we mentioned before, they need still to comply with the current legal and regulatory framework. So in more detail, the prohibited practices involve AI systems that involve, for example, subliminal techniques that go beyond the person's consciousness to distort the person's behavior in a harmful way. AI systems that can be used to target vulnerable individuals and take advantage of those vulnerabilities, social scoring, and the use of real-time remote biometric identification systems by law enforcement, except when certain rules that they are set out in the Act are met. Moreover, Annex 3 of the AI Act contains a numerus clausus list of high-risk AI systems. And also the Act states that the need to update this list will be assessed by the European Commission annually. So although the idea behind this annex was to facilitate the identification of high-risk AI systems, this approach has been severely criticized, has not been very welcomed. And the reason is it's not that dynamic. It may create a false sense of security to AI providers, because in practice, it means that a system might be launched in the European Union market without being subject to the rules, and after a year, it will be subject to the obligations posed to high-risk systems. And of course, that has associated risks of compliance, of possible fines, as we will see later on. And also costs, compliance costs for the company. And at the same time, it's not that very pragmatic, because we do have a higher level of intervention at the first stages and first phases of the AI lifecycle. In any case, you can see that the current wording includes several already well-established uses of AI, such for example, use of biometric data. It's used by many companies irrespective of the sector, let's say for security purposes, to access premises or devices, training, education, HR, assessing creditworthiness, and then there are also uses that they refer to use of AI by the judiciary and law enforcement. With the exception of some additional provisions, the core obligations stipulated in the AI Act refer to the obligations of high-risk AI providers and users to some extent. The majority of the obligations mirror a lot the rationale that was also followed in the GDPR. So we are talking about data governance, so including data quality, error-free, bias-free obligations as well. Documentation and reporting, so keeping a map of all the processing of AI, of all its output, input, and decisions, having also some internal procedures and internal AI governance. Transparency obligation, so provision of information. And this is important to note that this transparency obligation does not refer to provision of information to consumers. It refers to professional users of AI. So other companies using AI that has been introduced in the market. Accuracy and safety, so the robustness of the system, but also cybersecurity. And this is very closely linked to having human oversight, human in the loop, and monitoring the decisions, and also having risk mitigating measures. And to do that, you need to clearly identify, of course, the risks. So again, a risk-based approach passing from the law, from the proposal of the regulation to the companies. And lastly, of course, the relationship with the authorities, which depending on the system might be subject to authorizations. This is, of course, contrary to the transparency obligations that aim to protect consumers. So this is a bit a confusing structure of the Act. On one hand, we have those objective compliance-based obligations and focus on professional users. And then we have the transparency obligations for those limited risk AI users that refer to provision of information to consumers. What does this obligation state? That when we have AI systems that they work in a proximity with humans, so for example, AI interacting with humans, such as virtual assistants, they must clearly provide information regarding their nature, stating, for example, that currently you're speaking to an AI. Emotion recognition and categorization systems must notify users of their use. And also deepfakes, which we had various cases the past years as well, should disclose that the content was artificially created or manipulated. Lastly, although different fines apply depending on the different violations, you can see that the fines are pretty high. They vary between 10 to 30 million or up to 6% of the total worldwide annual turnover of companies. Again, mirroring a bit the GDPR approach. In any case, the AI proposal is still being discussed, and considering the criticism that it has received, it will probably take a while to have a final text. However, we will probably have some developments during 23. In any case, companies will have some time. With the current wording, it is stated that companies will have almost 2 years, 20 months from its entry into force once the text is actually finalized. We also have a compromise text, but it does not add many differences to the existing one. And now, before passing to my last slide and concluding the presentation, I would like to briefly refer also to the new proposals on liability. So the new product liability directive and the proposal for an AI liability directive. These directives are important because the AI Act does not include civil action procedures, does not mention damages. And these two directives should be read in conjunction, since once they pass, they will complement each other. They will create an overall effective civil liability system in the EU, and hopefully they will benefit AI adoption. And of course, someone might think, how will liability rules help increase the adoption of AI in the EU? However, in the impact assessment that came together with the proposals, it was stated that a harmonization measure of civil liability for AI is expected to have a positive impact of 5 to 7% on the production value, because of course the risks will be passed down in the value chain and there will be more regulatory clarity. So the new product liability directive will replace the 37-year-old current directive, and it will adapt the existing no-fault producer liability rules, so strict liability, as it is mentioned in most common law, in most civil law countries, to the digital age, also to the circular economy, and has specifically regulation applicable to AI liability, so covering defects caused by the software update. So also by AI system updating itself, learning itself through machine learning and deep learning. And it includes also liability for data losses. And this is very interesting because data losses, from a practical point of view, is the most notorious exclusion of liability that we see in contracts, mostly coming from companies from common law jurisdictions. And we are usually battling it as breaching general law provisions or being excessive or even breaching the GDPR, but now it will be impossible to exclude that data loss from contracts once the new product liability directive comes into force, and once, of course, it's transposed into national law. And of course, the objective is that the consumers, the EU consumers, are protected regardless of whether the manufacturer is inside or outside of the EU. So we also have a level playing field in terms of liability. On the other side, the AI liability directive will be creating a set of fault-based liability rules. So on one hand, strict liability, no fault-based, and the other one, fault-based liability rules, regulating damages caused by AI, with the exception of transportation. So autonomous vehicles will be out of the scope here. And the objective is to promote trust, predictability for businesses, and ensuring compensation of victims from any individual that is using AI, including, in this case, non-professional users of AI. So it should be noted that, let's say, the most important terms of the proposal, aside from updating the product liability directive and bringing it to the 21st century, is certain rebuttable presumptions of defects and damages. And under certain circumstances, the obligation to provide information that can substantiate this claim, so provide evidence. And this is important because, especially from the perspective of consumers, it might be quite complicated to prove a defect or to prove that the output of the AI system was wrong. So the proposals, of course, again, will also be subject to further negotiations. They are very new, and they will still need to be adopted by the Parliament and the Council before coming into force. However, probably they will come hand in hand with the Act. Perhaps they will even be approved around the same time. And to conclude, considering that the directives and regulations mentioned in this presentation are not in force, what can companies, either AI providers or AI users, do to ensure that their AI systems are compliant with the current framework, and even more, that they are future-proof in order to comply with the upcoming legal framework? Considering the compliance costs that would be associated with leaving it for last minute and adapting products, services, contracts, policies, internal procedures, companies should act proactively and set out their AI strategy now. We saw the same thing with the GDPR. Companies that acted fast were the ones that could benefit the most from the reputational benefits related with showing that you comply and generating trust for your products and services in the long run. So what they need to do is define their AI strategy now. And to identify this AI strategy, they need to address the various legal challenges and ethical challenges that we saw throughout this presentation, while taking into consideration the entire AI lifecycle. And this is important because one size does not fit all, and there are no silver bullets when it comes to AI. Every application is different. Every sector is different. So the context of the AI should be seen. And also, it's important to understand that different challenges might be more prominent in different phases of the AI lifecycle. So this means, first of all, and this is already included in the AI Act, that companies need to introduce a clear data strategy, that they say that they should also, for example, already carry a data impact assessment, as it's already outlined in the GDPR, but also they need to define their data strategy for non-personal data. Similarly, an AI legal impact assessment that can map the different risks throughout the life cycle and identify means to mitigate them is important. If you carry that risk assessment thoroughly, you will be able to better see how you can tackle the challenges that are particular to your sector and to the particular application of AI. And that can be, for example, contractually, so including certain provisions to ensure both that you protect certain proprietary information, trade secrets, that you're ensuring protection of the algorithm itself if you are a provider, but also that you have clearly outlined the responsibilities of the parties and you have spread them out in the value chain. And also by defining internal organizational processes, collaboration and multidisciplinarity of the various teams, because it's not only a legal task, as it's not only an IT task or a commercial task. And finally, mapping a bit your role under the Act as it's with its current wording to sort of anticipate the compliance measures that you need to comply with. And of course, also map the other obligations that you might need be subject to, either due to the application of the AI or due to your sector. So that was from me. Thank you very much and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Iakovina. Well, your presentation was clearly an excellent demonstration of the importance of this partnership between APDC and VDA, because it allows us to count on VDA expertise, as you have demonstrated clearly, and also you were really able to explain all the practical aspects of that must be taken into account in the drafting of European legislation of artificial intelligence. So let me just start to explain to our participants that we will now engage in a conversation with our guests. And if you want to make some questions, we would prefer you to use the Q&A function instead of the chat, because the Q&A will be visible. We can see it, all the panelists, and the chat, it's more difficult for us to be sure that we are answering all the questions. So also for this conversation, I will have the help of Tiago Bessa, also from VDA. So he's normally joining me in formulating the questions to our guests. And normally we also start with a general question, a common question to all our guests, our speakers, which are now for Rui Lopes. And then for Danielle, I would like to start with Rui. What are your thoughts on the proposal of the AI Act that Iakovina has presented us?
Good morning to everyone, and thank you once again for the invitation. So I think what we are seeing is the normal regulation that needs to be in place when you have such powerful technology that can impact people's life. So and of course there are concerns about how this can cause some attrition in innovation pace. But honestly, I don't think that will be a problem. I can see some kind of analogy before the GDPR being placed, that there were also some concerns about how what will be the impact in companies, particularly in small companies, to be able to compete with at the same time to be able to put in place some of those processes. But the market adapted very well. So today we can see that we have a more trusted market, and things are working very well in the case of GDPR. And in the case of AI, I believe it will be the same. As I said, the impact in our lives will be profound, especially in things like courts or legal systems, healthcare, banking, financing, etc. So it's fundamental that we have regulation, because the technology per se, it's not good or bad. It's what people do with it. And of course, we need to make sure that we have that kind of regulation in place to avoid bad actors to abuse and to have systems that can not impact in a negative way society. So just to in a positive way. So I think that by making sure that we have more trusted systems, the positive, it's a motivation to build more positive impact in society. This is the initial thought that I'd like to share with you.
Thank you, Rui. Danielle, so the same question for you. Can you, are you there? Yes. Can you tell us what are your thoughts on the proposal of the Artificial Intelligence Act that Iakovina told us?
Yeah, no, it's a great step forward by the EU, especially compared to other countries who are lagging behind, even in privacy at the moment. So, like the US, with most innovation actually happen, which is an interesting paradox. From the point of view of Nokia, I think we are very much aware. We are following the different drafts of the AI Act, and that's one of the reasons why we defined the responsible AI strategy initiative, starting from Bell Labs and then going throughout the company. We define the 6 pillars that we think are important. And the important thing is that every system, or even to assist developers within the company to be compliant, currently compliant with the AI Act, we're actually having assisted tools that sort of prompt developers within the company to actually think about the different aspects that the AI Act will cover. So definitely agree with the proactivity here, because there is a space for a competitive advantage if you take care of this aspect that the AI Act is laying out. Now, there are interesting little aspects like the subliminal part that nobody knows, right? The extent to which, for example, current social media would engage into that. But those are little things for geeks to discuss about. But I think, yeah, definitely it's a great opportunity there. It's an opportunity more than hindering innovation, actually. I think I would agree with that point.
And before passing the word to Tiago, I couldn't resist to challenge Iakovina because the wording of the law, especially in the area of digitalization and in Europe, is described as being retroactive. So do you think that Europe is acting more proactively to protect our human values in this case of AI?
I think that it touches both sides. It's passing a bit more to the proactivity than to expose going to solve the problem. So with the liability, and even the timings show this tendency that first the act came out, and although they were announced together with the plan of issuing also liability rules, the proposals only came after 1 year, almost 1.5 years after the AI Act proposal. They will complement each other. However, it's very interesting that change in the scenery, because as Daniele and Rui mentioned, this is a way forward and a way to avoid hindering innovation by allowing also companies to take upon the obligation to assess their compliance in a more self-regulatory perspective, instead of the regulator trying to prevent or correct damages that it does not understand, or it's too difficult to estimate at this point of the technology.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Iakovina, for the wonderful presentation, and for the speakers for the introductions. We have some questions in the Q&A from the participants. Thank you very well for your participation as well. Let me get back to Rui making a question about the project that he has been developing over the past years regarding Alice, the personal assistant. We know that Alice is right now available for the health, for some health institutions, and also for banking institutions. Can you explain a little bit the project and also the main concerns or problems that you are facing when adapting Alice to some specific sectors?
Sure. Alice, it's an AI assistant that can interact in a natural language, both in voice or text. Like you said, so she is able to interact in healthcare and banking for specific processes in that on those sectors. So we launch with Lusíadas, that was part of United Healthcare Group, the first AI voice assistant able to schedule any kind of medical appointment on all units across the country and in an autonomous way. And so this innovation comes from Portugal, and it's the first experiment that has been with success in this area, and of course, when you do that kind of innovation for the first time, you need to be very careful, and you need to take step by step all the measures, all the processes that will assure that you have a safe and secure rollout with a good experience to the end user, to the patient. At the same time, healthcare has a very specific language. So you have some complex name of some specialties, for instance, agreements with insurance companies. So it's a complex industry. And of course, an AI assistant needs to handle with that. Even if you think in a cognitive way as a human, it's to schedule a medical appointment is something that it's simple for a human, but for this kind of system is not very simple. It's a hard process to accomplish. And so that was our main challenge, because in the end, you are providing not only convenience, because it's natural language, but you are also providing inclusion and accessibility, especially in sectors like healthcare, right? So our goal is to humanize the experience as far as the state of the art can allow us. So we are always pushing and trying to get a more humanized experience, so people can have a fluid conversation and can have a great experience. So in banking sector, it's different, but also it is a complex industry, very regulated as well. So Alice, in the case of banking, is able is one of the few AI assistants worldwide that is able to make transactional operations like transfers and payments and unlocking accounts and asking for a new debit card or to activate your debit or credit card, etc. And so again, the difficulty is how with so many scope of operations that you can do, how can you provide a humanized experience? And that's the main challenge that we have. We have been working in the last 6 years with that drive, because one of the things that we see in the market, it's many times the drive for this kind of systems is automation. Yeah. And we believe that's not the right drive, because many times you end up with a system that is robotic, that tries to automate, but it's not concerned with the experience that provides to to the customers, to the users. In this kind of systems, in conversational interfaces, the expectation from the customer is different from interacting with a mobile app or a website, because because you are using your tool, a human tool that is language, so the expectation is different. That's why usually you see extreme emotions when you deal with this kind of systems. If it works well, it feels like magic, right? Because you just speak and the system understands you, and you are able to fulfill your request. But on the other hand, if you ask for something that you think it's simple and the system does not understand you, or it's slow in providing an answer, you don't have tolerance for dumb machines if you want to talk with dumb machines. So we don't have time for that, right?
Yeah.
So, and we feel very frustrated with that.
Let me ask you, Rui, because we have a question that will follow very smoothly what you are explaining. The question is, how was Alice trained to identify specific medical terms? So how did you train Alice? It was literature, vocabulary. How did you address this topic?
Yes, it starts by there, but then you have the reality, and reality is that people use different terms for the same thing, abbreviations, wrong terms sometimes, and you need to be able to interpret all that variety. But again, if your drive, it's not automation and it's experience, you will go after all that variations and the system. The more interactions it has, the more smart, if you want, it becomes.
It will be.
It will be. So again, we launched this voice system for healthcare, the first one only last year, but the truth is that we are been working on that for the last 6. Yeah. So step by step, as I said, sure. It's a long journey, but it's possible.
It's possible. Thank you, Rui. Getting back to.
Yeah, I don't resist just to share curiosity with the people that are listening us, that are participants, is that the ChatGPT was trained with the kind of literature and the input that was used to train ChatGPT. It would get a human more than 5,000 years to read all the information. So this is the kind of systems, the AI systems, that need lots of data and that will improve. So I think it's quite courageous of Gentify AI to launch this kind of program and projects in the market, because they are early developers. So all the developers that will come after will have the curve of knowledge will be much higher. So it will be easier for others to come with solutions.
Thank you, Sandra. Danielle, I believe that one of the concerns, thinking globally on the AI Act, is how this will interplay between different regions, because you mentioned that the US is lagging behind, so the European Union is trying to take the lead on this matter, which is good for us. We know that, for instance, in China, perhaps they are more advanced, and some of the practices that Iakovina explained that they are completely forbidden in the AI Act, they will be allowed, or they are allowed in China. And being Nokia a global company, does these differences poses challenges, and how you are thinking to address them? Because one of the questions that we have in the Q&A is, would not make sense to have a global AI Act here, maybe a treaty that all different regions could subscribe and adopt the same principles and rules, or these different rules in different regions will in fact impact on global companies such as Nokia?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are different aspects of regulations. There's also cultural differences there of what is interpreted to be private, for example, right? So it could be very culturally dependent. So in general, I'm not speaking for Nokia, but a company that is global, depending on the market that that company wants to enter, it needs to adapt to the local market. That's as simple as that. Now, the good news is that if the EU is going forward, that's good news, because it's more restrictive in a way to a certain extent for compliance. So that means that you can operate even in bigger markets, which is great news. And for the global, universal understanding of these rights, well, the United Nations is already thinking about it, right? And especially they're defining how the human rights interact with AI technologies. And they came up also with a recent publication on that, and they are working with all countries in the world to actually figure out whether we can write such a document in the end. But that's also coming, I think.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm aware of your project regarding the happy maps that you explained in different events. Can you talk a little bit about that project, because it's connected with what Rui explained about the humanization of AI, and also how do you see AI being integrated in urban design to enhance the quality of life for citizens in cities? Can you explain a little bit your project on this?
All right, yeah, sure. Happy maps, let's see. Well, that is, if you guys search for happy maps, then there is a 8-minute talk that sort of explains the whole idea. But simply put is, if you want to walk in your city from A to B, your Google Maps on your phone will give you the shortest path. Whereas the app we sort of built will give you not the shortest path, but the short path that makes you happier, right? So instead of walking 20 minutes, you walk 22. We sort of do these things a bit, right, ourselves, especially if we know the city and we are there. We sort of take the parallel road, and just because it's narrower, there are less cars, we do that intuitively. We just wanted to develop a system that does that for you, right? Now, then the big question is, how do you quantify what makes people happy? And there we actually had 4 years worth of studies and platforms to actually basically quantify the elements, for example, from Google Street Views that tend to make people happy: presence of greenery, absence of cars, length of width of the road, etc., etc. So it's basically the bottom line is that all the urban elements that sort of support potential for pedestrian activity are the elements that sort of make people safe and then conducive of happiness, right? That's basically 4 years summarized in a minute and a half. How then the second part of the question was I should remember that.
Now, how do you integrate the AI into urban design to enhance the quality for citizens and create more livable and sustainable cities?
Excellent. So that's a very good question. So now let's just take the example of the happy maps, right? There it was a short path that makes you happier versus shortest, right? And most of the times, especially as technologists, we all think about trying to maximize for efficiency, right? Especially back in the days of the smart city movement, companies were thinking about sensors, things that would make our life efficient. When we go to work, we are always going to be on time. When we go shopping, there is no queue, but because there is going to be an app to tell us when we go shopping. And, we feel really, really safe because there are CCTV cameras around us, right? So that's good. That's a sort of will create an acceptable city, and I understand why companies want to sell that kind of storytelling. But that's not what makes a city great. That's not why we choose to live in a city. We choose to live in a city because it's conducive of opportunities for work. That also is conducive to our flourishing as human beings. It's conducive to our well-being. We feel comfortable, etc., etc. So then the question becomes how AI can play a role. Well, AI can move from the efficiency idea and can try to quantify these very difficult concepts that are intangible, like what makes people happy, what is conducive of the well-being of people, how can you structure transportation system to actually have, yes, you get from A to B, but you get in maybe in a more proper way that is conducive to your own physiology, for example, right? There are tons of devices that now measure our physiological responses to stress or lack of stress, right? So there are tons of things that people can do if they had the courage to actually quantify these things that matter for us as humans, but they're seen by AI experts to be unquantifiable, which they are not entirely.
Thank you, Danielle. Very, very, very interesting. I'll get back to you in a minute in a question around ethics. But now a question more legal. I believe that one of the most puzzling questions here, and this is for Iakovina for sure, is how will be the interplay between the AI Act with other different acts, such as the Niche 2, the cybersecurity, the DORA regulation that came out just last week. So a question for lawyers, practitioners, and for academics is, will there be an overlap of regulation? Because Iakovina, you mentioned that the AI Act has some rules surrounding cybersecurity. So, and then we have the whole package of cybersecurity rules. So there is an overlap of regulation. Are we aiming for, high regulation on this matter? What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Tiago, and thank you also, Isabel, because the question also came from a participant. It's very interesting, and it's very interesting both as a practitioner and as an AI researcher academically to try to address this question. So it's a bit of a messy business. However, they do seem to identify and recognize each other. So, for example, in relation to Niche 2 directive, essential services are considered high-risk AI systems, and creditworthiness, to touch a bit upon DORA, and I will add on top of DORA the anti-money laundering regulation that is still under discussion, and it will replace the directive-based regime, will also shake the financial services, and is also a high-risk AI use based on the current wording of the AI Act. So we do identify between the different regimes a common strategy to address sectors that they are important for the European Union, first of all, and secondly, that align with the new rules coming to complement one another in the digital services. However, again, here we are seeing the same problem that we are seeing with all the new rules that create the framework for digital services and emerging technologies in the EU, that is overlapping of obligations. And since we have only proposals or rules that they just became applicable, we still don't have clear guidance and a clear idea of how they will be applied. So there is a danger, and the danger might be greater for SMEs, for example, or startups in terms of compliance, and in relation to the costs and know-how and specialization to be able to address this, that we would have an overlap of obligations, of tasks and compliance measures, that there needs to be guidance coming probably from the European Commission, not only from authorities at a national level. We are trying a bit to accommodate it theoretically and also in practice to our clients, but there is the danger of gold plating, which we are already seeing, meaning companies overdoing it in order to avoid the risks associated with non-complying with the obligations, because the fines are huge. And that might create some paralysis and freeze the market for a bit. But there are efforts to try to compensate that. The easiest way to see this is, for example, that in practice we are trying to not duplicate what we call a data strategy that is necessary to feed the AI strategy, and try to use the information that we have when we are assessing the risk from a cybersecurity perspective, when we are passing to the cybersecurity mitigating measures for the AI itself. So it's better not to consider this in a vacuum, but see it as a whole, and try to match, as you very well mentioned, the different pieces of the puzzle in order to fit instead of overlap with one another.
Thank you, Jaco. I mean, that will be a challenge for sure for everyone involved in these matters. But as you said, it is a big puzzle with different pieces that are coming out in recent years. Rui, I have two questions for you. One more practical, which is stated in the Q&A. I don't know if you can answer to this, but one of the questions is mentioned how you should apply AI to use in automated credit scoring, and if this leads to some adverse selection and potentially moral hazard. Since you have this connection with the financial institutions, I mean, I'm aware that's not to give some credit scoring or ranking, but maybe you can say some words on this. And then a more, let's say, forthcoming question. It's interesting because I read that you took the idea for Alice seeing an animated film. So being a fan of science fiction, I'm curious to ask what you have in the pipeline, what new adaptations and new ideas you will come out from animated videos and put in the market.
Thank you for the questions. So regarding the first one about the scoring, credit scoring, for instance, so our focus is to making accessible through natural language the interaction with these kind of services. So it's not our focus to take decisions about credit scoring or any financial analysis, if you want, that of course has that kind of concerns and risk associated. So just to be clear, that our focus is in the interaction in natural language and not on taking decisions about financial decisions. But of course, even for that kind of interaction, we need to have system supervision training always, but it's a lower risk in terms of harmful that can provoke. Regarding the one of our inspirations, it's Baymax. It's a Disney character from the Big Hero 6 film. That is what he was a personal assistant for healthcare, and the idea is that that you could have always someone taking care of, or at least give you information about at every stage of your life what you should do to promote your well-being and your health. And that's something that we have when in the first years of our life, typically by our parents that take care of all the checkups and exams that we need to do. But at some point in life, you are on your own. and sometimes you don't take care of that. And of course, because of the lack of resources today that we see everywhere, and especially in healthcare, it will be impossible today to have a personalized system that interacts every day with millions of patients according with their needs and in their context. Imagine you would have to set up call centers specifically to this kind of guidance and to enter in contact with each patient each day according with their context. So this kind of technology allow for this kind of processes to be implemented in automatic way. So here we are not talking about automating things that you already do today. Here we are talking about creating a new process, and this could impact in a positive way society. So it's a new value that you are creating. So you are not automating something that exists, and it's not optimizing. It's creating new value for the society that directly impacts the health of a population. So these kind of things is what drive us. Of course, we need to start on the basis.
Yeah.
On the basics, and the basic was, or thought was, okay, for this kind of personal assistant, at least when I need to schedule an appointment, it needs to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So the problem was it took us 4 or 5 years to reach that simple in terms of cognitive. Human for human, it's a simple task, but not for this system. We found out that it's a very hard task to do it properly, but we did it, and now we are looking for this kind of impact, of positive impact, not only be reactive, but also in a proactive way to start to deliver this kind of value to society.
Okay, thank you, Rui. Danielle, one last question from my side. I mean, the two concerns that Iakovina explained in the prior presentation surrounding AI is explainability and ethics. So concerning explainability, we have a question in the Q&A asking if there is a technical commission working on this area. So I'm not sure if you are aware of somebody or technical commission working on how to create a common framework that companies might use in order to be more explainable and to present the results in potential audits. And the second question is how to include ethics when you are devising AI or including AI in city planning or company sustainability projects, as you explained that you have this project in Nokia.
Okay, thanks for the question. I think Iakovina can answer the question on the transparency. I think as far as I know, I mean, part of the AI Act also cover that, but nobody knows how the accountability is going to be happening, to be honest, as far as I know. Then for the urban applications, well, I mean, all the pillars that Nokia has defined, like the fairness, transparency, sustainability, privacy, accountability of who built the system, those are the 6 pillars. They do apply also to urban applications, obviously. The transparency is particularly interesting because nobody knows how to do it, technically speaking, in the sense that there are aspects of human in the loop, which there is a lot of academic work in the space, especially from the technical side. But then also like producing an explanation for a classification, let's say. A system says that this is a cat because, and then there is an explanation, right? Now, that explanation has nothing to do with reality. And most of the people who actually play with the chat GPT know that, right? Chat GPT has got these kind of hallucinations, which basically means most of explanations are things that look good, but they might be false. Which is an interesting way of interpreting explainability. And why is that? Because these machines are so complicated that there is no way that even if we were to have a sort of way to explain how the machine came up with that classification, that answer, there is no way that a person would understand it. So a translation invariably leads to falsehoods. And that, I think, is going to be one of the big areas, more interesting areas of research related to transparency. And then from the point of view of the other pillars, for example, sustainability, obviously, a lot of companies, and maybe in the audience is also the case, they are thinking about their ESG strategy, and in particular the sustainability strategy, and that is also great because most of the new language models, they do consume a lot of energy. Some estimations were at the par of New York City electricity consumption of a year just to train these machines. So this is also another topic that is going to become quite hot. And then in the urban context, just to end, surveillance, it's another big topic, right? So these technologies can be used for good things, but the very same technology can be used as to create a surveillance society. And that's also part of the reasons why sort of for high-risk applications, the AI Act does cover certain aspects that are related to biometric identification and social scoring.
Thank you, Danielle. Before concluding, Sandra, I think that one last question to Iakovina, because we are aware that this package is not yet approved. We should expect some news during this year, as you mentioned, but only to be applicable maybe in 2024, 2025. But we are aware that companies are trying to cope, or at least to address some of the topics already included in the 3 acts that you mentioned. What can you, suggest to the companies that are listening to us that they should do right now, apart from what you presented in the slides, for sure?
So yeah, apart from the AI strategy approach, which sort of covers everything, and also to tackle the legal part of the previous question that you posed, Danielle, because I saw in the chat that it was a repost also to me. Currently, aside from identifying the risks in terms of a governance perspective, we don't have many things to say, aside from auditability. So this is currently the state of the art. From a legal standpoint, this is where we see the biggest amount of effort. However, there is still a bit of lack, and that's why I mentioned that multidisciplinarity and collaboration between the different disciplines and different departments of companies is essential. We don't have a combination between the legal approach and the technical approach. So we have papers for both, but independently. But the idea is to tackle a bit the problem of explainability, especially for high-risk AI systems, as for example, as was the example that was posed by one of the participants for credit scoring, by ensuring, let's say, that the AI system can tell you what it took into consideration to arrive at a certain conclusion, and you will always have the human in the loop to correct the bias result, because usually, especially when we're talking about credit worthiness, this is the challenge behind it. This is not new. So it was used, let's say, for aviation, for example, that you will issue the report to make sure that the system runs properly, even though you don't know exactly what was taken into consideration. But it's still complicated to apply in practice, and it's complicated also to ensure that the report produced can be read by me, as well as by Rui, as well as by Daniele. So that's one part of the equation. The other part is contractual, and also tackles the other aspect of transparency and explainability. That is the provision of information. And this is a very important thing, and it was also pointed out by the Commission in various unofficial occasions so far, like seminars presenting the proposals, that already in contracts, be it AI as a service, complex agreements, or terms and conditions, terms of use to consumers, we need to already include clauses that specify who is liable for what, be it joint liability clauses, for example, or different indemnification clauses that they are linked with the provision of information, which brings me to the other obligation that, for example, it should also be included. Auditability of the AI provider that you are licensing or the AI service that you're using. So let's say a summary of that risk assessment that they need to carry to be made available to understand whether your partners are complying, whether the service as a consumer that you're engaging with complies with the framework, and some evidence in case of a failure of the system to support liability claims.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jaco, for these insightful suggestions. Sandra,
Yes.
I think that's all.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that you also gave us some insights of the professionals of the future, the jobs of the future that needs to be created to ensure that we have a proper AI at European level. So thank you for all the speakers and participants who have joined us for this webinar. We kindly ask you to provide an evaluation as you leave the event. You will see a pop-up window with a short questionnaire, and we will send a newsletter to all the registered attendees with the report of what we have discussed today, as well as the file of Iakovina's presentation and also the on-demand video so that you can review or also share this event. So thank you all, and we hope to see you again in the next APDC initiative.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.